Hi, I'm Randy Cross, and this is the Randy Cross Podcast. This is our 5th season. We've got a good one for you coming up here, centered around the NFL draft, obviously. That's the big news item from the last couple of days. And we're going to be joined by Charles Arbuckle, who's a television and radio analyst in college football and the NFL. He's a 5-year NFL veteran, played for the Colts and the Saints, and was a 2-time All-American at UCLA. All right? Let's get to that interview. As promised, I'm joined now by Charles Arbuckle, 2-time All-American, 4-year veteran of the NFL with the Indianapolis Colts, drafted in the 5th round, the 125th pick of his draft. Charles, welcome and thank you so much.
Thanks, Randy. I'll take that 5th year I got, even though it was just one in New Orleans. But it's funny when you bring up the draft. I was talking to a few guys and just the stories, and you remember how it was when you were going through that process. I thought I was going to go higher in the draft. It didn't happen until I think it was the second day, and I had heard anywhere from the 2nd to 4th round. So I kind of started getting upset. And then sure enough, you get a call, Jim Finks, somebody from the Saints organization called, hey, we're going to pick you with the 125th pick. When they do, all that stuff that you thought about kind of goes away because you finally get that chance to live out that dream you had as a kid.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and the draft is a lot different from my draft. I mean, you guys had the combine and all that when you were in the draft, right?
Yeah, we did. We had the combine, and it was actually 12 rounds then. And then not too long after us, it kind of went down to less rounds. But it was a combine. It was, I think we were on the tail end of what you guys got, all the stuff you had to go through. The pro days were a little bit different then, and the combine was a little bit more rigorous. I don't know many guys that opted out when I was coming out, unless you had injury.
Yeah.
And I always tell people the thing that really struck me about the combine was what you saw when you got there. I think it was the pressure cooker of them trying to make you, feel uncomfortable. And the interviews were a lot longer, and the questions, they didn't have any HR questions. It was they get to ask you almost anything. So I think it was a thing to me that I remember coming out of there. It was like, people ask, well, when I go through interviews now and they talk about tough interviewing, I'm like, I've never been through a tougher interview than interviewing for a sport that I love growing up to play, and then getting into a position to play it at a high level, and then having to go through a 3 or 4 day intensive when you've already put 4 years on tape. So I think that's the part that was the craziest stuff for me.
How many Bruins got drafted that year?
I think it was 5 of us.
Okay.
It was myself, Frank Cornish, Marcus Patton. Mike Farr didn't get drafted, but he was another Bruin that played that year. That got, I think he signed free agent contract, or he might have been drafted late. I think it was 4 of us, and then there were a couple more that made it into camps and then got to play.
Hey, a great interview, by the way. Speaking of Bruins, and if you get a chance, check Charles's podcast with Troy Aikman. It's great to see Troy. Troy's a guy that he's done some amazing stuff since he left UCLA, since he finally got away from the wishbone offense in Oklahoma.
Well, it's a funny story about that. I worked with Jim Donahue for a number of years at ESPN and ESPNU, and Coach Donahue always talks about how Troy kind of got there. And he, Barry Switzer was really important, but Donahue will tell you he was the key factor in how Troy ended up at UCLA. And he says he was talking to Coach Donahue, and if you remember, at UCLA, they really didn't start quarterbacks before they were 4th year juniors or, almost their senior year. I mean, they went and put them through the rigors and all of that. So they didn't take a lot of transfers, especially at the quarterback position. But Donahue was saying, hey, we got this great kid, Aikman, whose dad was from West Covina, and, he needs a home. And, he said Coach Donahue, kind of the typical, I don't know, we kind of like to grow our own quarterbacks, and I don't know if that's going to, Coach Donahue, so
Oh,
you're like,
I know, Terry.
yeah. So, Terry says, I don't know, we really don't take transfers. And he said, basically, and how Donna would talk, he said, well, you'd be effing crazy if you don't consider this kid, because he can throw it a mile. He's 6'4", 230. We just can't use him anymore because we're running the wishbone. And so he sees him at the coaches convention the next year after Troy transferred, and they get on the elevator. TD is on there, I think, with somebody else from the staff, and Donna walks on and just turns around and doesn't even look at him. He said, hey, how did that Troy Aikman thing work out?
Yeah, exactly.
So, yeah,
exactly.
Randy, we knew from day one, we got a gem. I mean, just like when you went to play with Joe Montana, guys that are great. You just see it right away, right?
First practice.
Yeah. What was it about his first practice that got you, that you knew he was the guy?
Accuracy, unflustered. Bill was had a serious man crush because he knew how special he was, especially relating to the things he wanted to do.
Yeah.
And man, it was so much fun to see. But Terry Donahue was a big part of my life. I mean, he played on the '66 UCLA Rose Bowl team that beat Michigan State.
Okay.
And the other defensive tackle, hard to imagine Terry was a defensive tackle.
Yeah.
But the other defensive tackle was Steve Butler, who was my high school football coach.
Okay.
And so I met Terry my sophomore year in high school when he was still at Kansas with Pepper Rodgers.
Yeah, that's right. Uh-huh.
And between Steve Butler and Terry Donahue and Bob McKittrick, who was my O-line coach in San Francisco for 10 years, it was all techniques, Crowther sleds, everything was flat back and knee bend and all that.
Yeah.
I mean, but it enabled me to do everything I did. And TD was actually the first guy that put the ball in my hand and said, try to snap. We're going to see about moving you to center. I was like, all right. So after a couple of those practices, he goes, have you ever, I see you throw the ball really well. I said, yeah, I got a good arm. He goes, you ever throw it between your legs? And I was like, excuse me? He goes, snapping. He goes, you never know. It might keep you in the league for an extra couple of years. And I did all the snaps for 12 years in San Francisco.
Wow.
Never got a penny for
it. Well, I knew Joe Montana was going to be great because I was a University of Houston Cougar fan.
Oh, and that's true.
Yeah, and that I think it was the Cotton Bowl. And the Cougars were really good. And they just kept talking about this Joe Montana dude, little skinny guy but he was so cool, and he kicked Houston's butt. And after that, I told people, I was like, this dude is pretty special, but nobody was really, the draft wasn't that big then, but I think it was one of those things where they never talked about him. And I can remember as a kid, I'm like, that dude is really good. I don't know who he is. And after that, I mean, you got to play with them, but just even the guys that left UCLA that were around that organization with you or anything else, you heard so many great stories about how good he was. And I agree with you, Coach Donahue. I think the one thing that's underrated about him and his staff, and I know you guys had a great staff there at UCLA as well, was how well they recruited and how well they developed us. There were 35 guys in my time period that ended up playing in the league in my 4 years, whether they were Troy or Ken Norton or Carnell Lake, who came in as a running back and switched to a linebacker and then played safety in the pros. But the one thing I remember, they were really good about identifying where you could play and where you could play the earliest and where they could get you on the field and use your speed. And that's why we're such a good team. I mean, that's why the competition on Spalding Field made you so much better. And that's when I knew, I think after my sophomore year, that I could play at the next level. I wasn't sure how long or any of that, but you just could tell when we were playing in practice, the guys that I was going against every day, whether it was James Washington or Ken Norton or Eric Turner, rest his soul. Yeah. We had so many guys, and there was so much trash talk, like I'm sure it was with you when you were there. But it was great camaraderie, and it was probably the best 4 years I've ever had, just from a standpoint of being with a group of teammates and learning how to grow and understand the game of football.
Yeah. Do you really think is the draft better off? Is it a better process now with social media and the minutia
Yeah.
to the degree? I've always said it's a coin toss.
Yeah.
It's just you got about a 50-50 chance of being right, which I know pisses off all the metrics people. Because they can put information in a computer and they can tell you this guy will absolutely be great.
Yeah.
And my contention has always been, okay, well I can look at game film and I can tell you the exact same thing.
Yeah. Well, I think that's the thing I've talked about this week, but I agree with you. There are so many variables that go into what's going to make a player great or what's going to make a player not perform at his highest level. And I think there's so much around the draft now that it seems like the NFL has done a great job of marketing it. But I agree with you. Just because we think a guy's a surefire pick doesn't mean it's going to work out for him. There's just so many different things. The timing of where he ends up, what kind of coaching he gets there. We've seen it.
Amen.
You know what I mean? If you have guys that believe in you as a young player, your chances are better. Even if you're not a starter, you can see where guys go and they get a chance to learn and develop. I don't know if you get that now, especially at the quarterback position. You don't get much time. And if you don't play right away and perform well, Josh Rosen is a good example of that. Think about how many places he's been. And I know watching him in college, I thought for sure he could play at the next level, but it hasn't worked for him. And there's other guys you look at on the other side, like a Shannon Sharp, who most people looked at like Savannah State, a wide receiver, 6th-round pick, goes to Denver. He goes to an offense, the West Coast offense, where you play with a lot of great tight ends that were able to, match up issues and put them in position, and all the things you guys did in that West Coast offense. I think that's the thing that you just never know how it's going to. I mean, Brent Jones is another example of a guy that
Santa Clara.
Yeah, I mean, so I agree with you. It's got to be a situation where you land somewhere and when you get your opportunity, you got to seize it. And I don't care what round you're drafted in. Football is a little bit different, and I know they try metrics, but it's not baseball. It's a little bit different sport. And I don't know if the analytics guys are ever going to be 100% accurate in how they pick the draft.
Don't say that. Don't say that. It's like doubting the jab. That'll get you in trouble.
Yeah.
Hey, this is going to be a great draft. I mean, it's as we're doing this, it's just coming on TV. A lot of conversations about quarterbacks in this top 5, top 10. And the stink bomb dropped into the room here recently today was the fact that Green Bay might be willing to part with Aaron Rodgers. Yeah. And that he may be a guy that would be perfect fit to go home in San Francisco. That would screw everything up.
It really would. I think, Randy, it's funny. People were asking me, out of the Shanahan tree, which quarterback would he like the most out of the young guys? And I still contend it's Justin Fields because of his ability to move and manufacture plays. Maybe he's not the best thrower. Maybe he's not a Mac Jones. But to me, he fits with what Mike Shanahan, who Kyle's father, mobile guys that could play. But if you can get Aaron Rodgers, even at 37 years old, and Tom Brady's showing you he played till 43 or whatever, he's going to be years old still spinning it. Aaron, if he goes back to San Francisco, that will make them an instant contender. That offense is totally going to be changed with the way they want to play ball. And he will be in a place that he's comfortable with and that he knows he's not going to be looking over his shoulder anytime soon.
Well, one thing that with that potential signing / trade, whatever you want to call it, would do, we'd have some trades and some trade ups and some action, which doesn't. I mean, sometimes it happens, sometimes it doesn't. I remember a few years back, Jacksonville drafted a defensive tackle. What was his name? But anyway, they picked him like at 11, and he was supposed to.
It wasn't Calais Campbell, was it?
No. It was
Okay.
a Polynesian guy.
Okay.
But they took him at 11, and he was projected to be a like 20-25 guy,
Uh-huh.
and everything went to hell. There were people crawling all over each other, trying to make trades, throwing around future picks. That to me is entertaining when it turns
Yeah.
into a horse trading contest.
Well, I think you know this too from being, an offensive lineman. We never value offensive linemen like anybody else. I mean, we talk about edge rushers, we talk about, great receivers, tight ends, and Kyle Pitt, running backs, but they never talk about the great old lineman. And I like the drafts where they'll take one early and then it starts to be a trickle of guys that will get drafted high. And I think that's the part that we don't spend enough time talking about, because that you talk about a crapshoot. Picking a great offensive lineman, as you know, is never easy because of all the things you have to do. And if you're an inside guy, that's even more. I mean, I think Quentin McDonald a few years ago, Quentin Nelson, excuse me.
Quentin Nelson, yeah.
Yeah, excuse me. When he got selected by the Colts, I kept telling the folks in Indy on radio, I said, y'all don't watch him enough, but that kid is nasty. And it's not just his nastiness, his footwork and his technique. He makes everybody better. And that's hard to do as a guard.
Yeah.
Let alone a tackle. So I always kind of look, because I played tight end, but I've stood next to you guys my whole life, and we've always had meetings together. I watch the interior line play. I watch the exterior line play because it's so essential to any good offense and any good team.
Yeah, I mean, I love Penei Sewell.
Mm-hmm.
There should be 3 offensive linemen in the top 12, potentially.
Yeah.
Because they are that good. And I think Sewell's easily the best. But looking at the way he kind of gets, guys like that get pushed down in these sorts of drafts because of the quarterbacks, I find interesting. You mentioned Shannon Sharp. I mean, Shannon Sharp was Pitt's 30 years ago.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, exactly.
Doing the exact same kind of stuff.
Exactly. That's why I think we get enamored with things and we say, well, we haven't seen that. We've seen it in guys, but it wasn't the same way, and he didn't come from a big school. But then when you start looking for tight ends like that, now Pitt's really, what I like about him too is he's a little bit bigger than I thought, but he looks so slender because of that 6'6" frame. He's never going to have to block anybody. I mean, they may just put him in front of people just to, stand in the way. Where he's going to make his money, as you know, is in that interior area, 20, 25 yards, deep ends, some seam routes. But he has the ability to kind of make things happen against you. I'll tell you the other guy that reminds me a lot of one of my former teammates. A lot of talk about Devontae Smith slipping down the draft board, which I don't see happening, but I think some of that talk is there. A lot of similarities to Flipper Anderson, who I saw a couple of years every day in practice. Flip was so smooth, and his route running would run by you, and he was a legit 4-3 guy on grass and played fast even with his pads on. Wasn't a big guy in stature, but always seemed to make plays, and still holds a record for 336 yards in an NFL game with the Rams.
Hey, what do you think of some of the rules changes, college football wise? I imagine you'd be in favor of this one-time transfer thing. It's a long time coming, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm in favor of it, but I'm wondering what's it going to do to the game. How's it going to change it? And I think I think we needed something like that, because you have some coaches that get vindictive and don't allow kids to transfer, even though they don't want them on the team anymore. So it becomes like a football purgatory where they can't play.
The classic on that is, yeah, you can transfer, but nowhere in our own conference.
Yeah.
It's like, what's up with that? Is that like a special rule that they just come up with?
And I think the first few years we'll see a lot of kids transferring that may not need to transfer or shouldn't transfer, and then I think it should work itself out. I think overtime, I think I'm glad that they're continually tweaking overtime to try to get it as, as entertaining, but not as taxing on a team as possible. So I think that's another good rule. College football, needs to be tweaked every year, as we know. I mean, I think it helps the game.
Oh, yeah.
It helps keep it going in the right direction. And I think, the big thing is how many fans are we going to see in the stands this year? With us kind of coming out of COVID, people seem to be working in the right direction on vaccines or, getting healthy. So that's going to be interesting to see.
I know one thing, the SEC right now, most of those schools are counting on full stadiums.
Oh yeah, well, it means more. It really means more to those cats down there. I don't think they have even really cared. And it's interesting living in the South and understanding, growing up in the South. I know what football is like, and I can only imagine that the stands are going to be packed at any SEC school in the fall.
Yeah, I mean, I moved down outside of Atlanta
Mm-hmm.
in '92. So I was like 38 years old. And I had no idea. I thought I played a sport, and I moved down here and I found out I played a religion.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, it was crazy how
Randy,
nuts they are.
Between football and barbecue.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, you go to your barbecue Saturday morning to watch football. Those are your two religions on Saturday, and then you go to church on Sunday. So yeah, it is. Football is a religion down here, man.
Oh yeah. Hey, you're involved with the Joe Moore Award. How have you enjoyed that whole process, and what do you think about sort of the way that it's been? I guess, people have really wrapped their arms around it and embraced it, and it's become quite a deal. I mean, Aaron Rodgers and Aaron Taylor and everybody, Lena, they should be so proud because they put in a lot of grunt work early, and that award has really taken off.
It's funny. I served on the John Mackey Award as well. And those are really the two awards. People always say, do you vote for the Heisman? I don't really give a crap about the Heisman. I think it's a great award. I think it's nice. Sometimes I think my bias with the Heisman is we have some people voting on it that shouldn't damn be well voting on anything in football, but they have them. So that's fine. And I don't have a problem with not being a voter for the Heisman. But when Aaron asked me to be on the Joe Moore Award, I was, hey, man, I'm not an offensive lineman. I'm a tight end. I spent a lot of time in those meeting rooms, understanding the value of having pit framing and guys like you and offensive linemen. But when he asked me, he said, man, it's like the old locker room. We're going to make it like that. We're going to have fun, but we're going to really get after it and honor people. And I want you to really start putting your film hat on. And I always watch film, but what it did is it just made me even get even more intimate with what goes on the inside and get back to looking inside out. When you watch film, most people look outside in, but it's really helped me see the game even more. And then being around you guys, just listening and talking and some of the techniques, aces and deuces, what we all know, and just combo blocks, just it's really been cool. But the biggest thing is we're honoring a group of guys that don't always get a lot of love. They do on their teams, but outside of that, they don't. And I think that's the part that I always love about old linemen. Usually really low-key, mellow cats, but you get them on the field and they're a bunch of nasty dogs. And that's what we've been able to do, honor those guys that play at a high level and consistently finish, tough, physical. And that's been a great thing. I love the gifts that we get. I got a little smoke. I got a little apron. I got, a little.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's been really cool. And it's been nice to be able to talk ball, but then honor them and have even, Nick Saban, when we were able to give them the award at Alabama this year. And anytime we give the award, you can tell these guys are really, they want to win the Joe Moore Award. And I think that's a testament to Aaron and his wife and just him putting that together. It's been really nice.
Yeah, it really has. Hey, for this draft, if you had a few guys, let's say 3 guys in the draft, any position, at all, that you look at and you go, that's going to be a long-time pro.
Yeah.
Who would they be?
Well, you said one earlier. I think Kyle Pitts will play a long time the way the NFL is structured for him. I'm really intrigued by Najee Harris, depending on where he goes. I don't know if I've seen a guy that explosive at that size here lately. He reminds me a little bit of the guy that was at San Francisco, and I think he may have been after you, Ricky Waters.
Ricky Waters, yeah.
But more athletic, a little bit more explosive than Ricky, but it's something about his style. And then, you mentioned it earlier. I think Penei Sewell can be a guy that will play as long as he wants, especially at the offensive line position. Those three guys kind of stand out to me. I can talk about quarterbacks, but I always kind of want to look at other players that seem to, just will play a difference and play for a long time at that. And I think hopefully become perennial Pro Bowl guys if they can match what they did in college to that next level and get the right coaching to put them in position to make those plays.
A kid I noticed that I liked was Poljan, the tight end out of Virginia.
Yes.
Do you think he's got a shot?
I think he has a shot. There's another kid that I like at tight end, Hunter Long, out of Boston College. I really liked him. I got to see them play early in the year. And I thought he really showed me something too. But yeah, both of those kids seem to have a real good upside. And just, as you know, getting to the right place, the team drafts them and there's a need and they have opportunity to play early. That's really all you want.
Oh yeah. Hey, my last question. We're not going to change the college football playoff system anytime soon unless we get a new TV redo deal or something. Yeah. So we're going to have 4. So people just got to get over it and deal with it. Mm-hmm. But with a 4-team format, is there any outsider that you think has a legitimate shot of getting to the playoffs and competing? Because it seems like every damn year, I'm getting tired of getting asked, how come it's the same teams every year? How come how come we can't get any new blood in there?
Yeah. Well, if you look at all the recruiting rankings and who's been able to develop those recruits, we right away, Alabama, Clemson, 1A and 1B, and then you got Ohio State generally in the mix. It seems to be the same schools consistently every year.
Georgia, Florida, Texas.
LSU. But to answer
those guys that play football across town from where we used to go to school.
Yeah, USC. So no, I don't know. If you mean off the beaten path or Boise State or somebody like that.
Yeah, not so much that, but even in Oregon.
Yeah.
Even Oklahoma State. Because I really don't legitimately think a team from the American Conference or the Mountain West God bless them. I love them, and I think it's great football, but they're not going to get a shot. It's just not going to happen.
Well, Randy, I think a few years ago, we used to think, we would talk about it in our meetings at ESPN, there were probably, we would stretch it and say there were 14 to 16 teams that could potentially be in that mix of 4. I don't think it's really more than 8 to 10, if many now. But you bring up a good point. The Oklahoma States, you think about the even us, UCLA. We haven't been a school that's been on the forefront of a lot of folks' minds, but you're in a hotbed of recruiting. You got a lot of talent. I think a school like Texas, could they? It has to be a school that gets hot and has great quarterback play, because it seems like every school that's in the mix, you're not going to get to that next level unless you have a top-notch quarterback. Yeah. And Alabama even saw that as they made a maturation to the 4-team playoff. They've been able to get quarterbacks that may not have been the best players, but they got a lot of great players around them. And I think you're starting to see that. If you don't have a quarterback, you won't even sniff. They won't even let you knock on the door. And I think that's going to be the real key for any team outside of the teams that we generally speak about as perennial folks that are there every year.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's going to take a little bit of a seismic shift in some of these other conferences, the Big 5, stuff that the Indianas and those kind of teams.
Yeah.
Have to get something going on. Hey, well, Charles, I appreciate it. I know it's a busy time with the draft and everything else going on, and It's great to be joined by a two-time All-American. UCLA hasn't had a whole lot of those.
Well, it's always good to join a 49er who played, what, 3, 4? How many Super Bowls did you win? Was it 4?
Three.
Yeah.
Only three.
Only 3. Well, yeah, no, that's pretty doggone good.
Yeah, I know, it was fun. Hey, thanks for joining me. Really appreciate it. And again, we'll put the link in the deal here. Check out Charles's podcast, especially his recent interview with Troy Aikman. You really love it.
Appreciate it, man. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Charles.
Take care.
Bye now. I really hope you enjoyed that. Charles is a good man, a lot of good information, and got some stuff in there for you to think about. Hopefully your team's drafting well, and some of the people we talked about have got a chance to find a career in the NFL as a professional. All right, let's go right now and remind you where you find this podcast. As always, you can find us on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram, all the social sites. We always advise you, though, the best place to go is randycross.com. That's where the podcast lives. All right? Hope you enjoyed it. We'll be back in a couple of weeks with our next podcast. But until then, as we love to say, happy trails and enjoy it.